Hello, Edie. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's really exciting to be back. Second time. Wow.
I know.
Very
I'm
cool.
just we when we first spoke to each other and everything that you were saying, I just knew we had to get two episodes out of you. So thank you so much for being willing to come onto the show twice.
I'm honored. Thank
And
you.
I'm really excited to talk about this one because it's a concept that everyone has heard about, especially in the last few years. But you love so much that you're actually, um, is it you submitted your TED Talks? Is that the right phrase?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Awesome. And that topic is all around consent. And
And touch.
yeah,
Yeah.
because that's where we know a lot about consent, or I think the world has had a discussion around consent in terms of the Me Too movement, but you talk about consent in so many ways, and in touch and verbal cues, and so I'll let you take the stage of just talking about really where this topic came from for you and why it's such a passion for you.
Sure. Absolutely. Touch is something that, number one, that we all need because we're human, and our single biggest organ is our skin. And when people don't get enough nurturing touch by consent, they fail to thrive. And when they do get that kind of touch, their relationships are better, they're happier, they're healthier, they take better care of themselves. So it's important, though, that it be by consent. Because think about when you're a little kid, you're told, oh, go hug Aunt so and so. And maybe she smells like smoke and you don't want to hug her. But your parents say, oh, you don't want to hurt her feelings, so go hug her. And I grew up in a home where that was not the case. I was encouraged to hug people, but I didn't have to if I didn't want to. And that's how I raised my son, and that's how they're raising my grandson. Is if there has to be an alternative like high fives or a smile or fist bump, whatever you feel like doing. So touch by consent became a really important concept for me in my life. I grew up in the 1970s. I was born in 1958, but I grew up mostly in the 1960s and 70s, and the sexual revolution, free love, all of that was coming to the fore. A lot of things that are not acceptable now were considered acceptable then. You mentioned the hashtag Me Too movement. A lot went on back then that people didn't talk about. And interestingly, when that happened, I thought, oh, that's never happened to me. I've never been sexually assaulted, thank God. Nothing bad has ever happened. And then I said, you know what? There was something that happened that was a little bit, to think about now, a little bit scary. When I was in my 20s, I was living in an apartment by myself, and I received these phone messages from somebody saying that back then I had hair down to here, and he was saying he wanted to wrap my hair around his naked body. And then he left a note on my windshield, and I went, who is this? Well, it turned out it was a neighbor who lived across the street. And I'm thinking, how the heck did he get my phone number? I guess, he just looking up in the yellow pages or call. Back then it was 411, I guess, for information. So after I turned the tape over to the police, I walked across the street with a male friend, and I said, I know what you did. I know this is from you. I was carrying the note with me, and I said, if you ever do it again, not only am I going to call the police, but do you want better? I'm going to tell your wife. And he never did it again. So I should not have been the exception to the rule, of people who've not been assaulted. So what I teach now is touch by consent. Two of the things that I do have to do with that topic. I'm one of those people that stand on street corners with a sign that says free hugs. I've been doing it since 2014. Valentine's Day weekend, we took a group of friends to 30th Street Station, which is a big train station in Philly, and we did a free hugs flash mob. And in about an hour's period, we hugged like a couple hundred people. And there were a dozen of us, so lots of arms to hug people. One of the people that approached us was an Iraq War vet who said that he was the only one of his platoon that made it out alive, and he had survivor's guilt. And he didn't want to live anymore. He said, I thought about ending my life until I met you people. Can I join you?
Oh
So
my God.
a few months after that is when I had my heart attack, and I decided to combine the hugging with the walking during my cardiac rehab. And when I started doing the free hugs work, I always asked, would you like a hug? And if someone said no, I didn't say, oh, come on, what's wrong? And I didn't, occasionally I'd feel, like, why don't they want to hug me? And then I realized people have their own reasons for not wanting to be touched. So I would say to them, okay, well, hug somebody, even if it's yourself. So we would do a virtual hug. You want to try that? You just kind of put your arms around yourself and squeeze, okay? And this is something that I've been encouraging people to do during the pandemic, especially if they live alone or they don't have anybody nearby that they can hug. So with children particularly, touch by consent is essential. So when there was a child with any of the adults that I asked about hugs, and the parent would say, oh, go hug that lady. And I'd say to the child, do you want a hug? And if they said no, it was no. And I would say to the parent, okay, I hope you don't think I'm trying to tell you how to raise your kid, but this is a teachable moment here. And I said to the child, nobody touches you without your permission. And no parent has ever said, don't tell me what to do. They've all said, yes, honey, that's right. You don't have to hug anybody if you don't want to. Yeah. So that's a big part of what I teach.
Yeah.
And I also facilitate a workshop called Cuddle Party, which is cuddleparty.com is the website. And I started doing it in 2005. I'm one of, I don't know if there are 200 of us now that are certified to teach this workshop. And it's about that. Communication, boundary setting, safe, nurturing, platonic touch by consent. And it's a workshop just for adults. You come to it dressed in PJs or sweats or yoga clothes. And after talking about the rules of cuddling, part of it has to do with consent. Then there's about 2.5 hours of hugging, snuggling, massaging, all with verbal consent. I haven't done that since my last one was like early 2020. And I'm still going to wait a little longer until things get a little safer to do it again. But those are valuable lessons, whether or not you're physically touching somebody, that you have the right to say yes or no in any circumstance.
And I think that's so important, even to bring it back to, listening to a child saying no, because if because I've definitely been there. I actually had a huge conversation after we spoke a few weeks back with my friend who has a 10-month-old now. And we were talking about how I've definitely done it where a little kid was squirming to get away and I turn it into a game of, oh no, give Auntie Steph a kiss. And, I've definitely done that and didn't even think anything of that. And she said same thing, like even with my own child, like I want to love on her and squeeze her and give her kisses and I want her to love her grandparents. But from a young age, learning the value of the word no. And that probably goes into even the cuddle parties of just, not having, or really from an early age, learning to not have respect for that word or ignoring that word or feeling in ourselves probably progresses into where, things for that cuddle party is probably so healing for people of just understanding that I can say no for anything, whether it's a kiss or a hug or high five, especially now in COVID, some people are still very, wanting to keep that distance where even a high five isn't okay. I want to give high fives in my classes and I hesitate and I still, is that okay? Are people okay with it? So even on what maybe consider the most basic levels for some, just learning to value that word no and being appreciated for it.
Right. And when I talk about it, in Cuddle Party and with my clients, is that not only does no mean no, but only hell yes means yes. Now with children, obviously, there's some things that they can't say no to, like running across the street. No, I want to run across the street no matter what you tell me, Mommy. I want to take something sharp out of the kitchen drawer and hurt my... So sometimes no is an important message. It's okay to say no to certain things, but we need to learn to live together on the planet. And some people were never taught to understand no. So it's a matter of asking ourselves, what are we saying no to? Like with my grandson, he's almost 2 years old at the time we're taping this, and there are times that he'll squirm to get away, and I let him, and then he'll come back for another hug, and then he'll run away. Or as I'm leaving, my son, if if the kids are there, if my son and daughter-in-law are there, they'll say goodbye to Bubby. Bubby is Yiddish for grandmother. And, go give Bubby a hug. And if he doesn't want to, they say, okay, can you blow kisses? So he blows kisses.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine. I don't take it personally if he doesn't want to hug me when I want to hug him.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's again, it's just so important to instill those lessons from such an early age because then those are the lessons that we carry with ourselves throughout life versus, having to be taught or learn those later on. Because even one thing we talked about was, especially as women, because we naturally are so giving and so nurturing of others and putting others before ourselves that we put others' comfort over our own discomfort, right?
Right. Yep. Yep. So consent has more to do than just touch. It has to do with, will you do me a favor? Can you drive me here, there, or everywhere? Can you pick this up when you're out? Can you, and there are times when I don't have time. Now, I'm a recovering codependent, people pleaser, emotional contortionist who would bend over backwards to please people. And one of the things that I've learned as I've gotten older is that I run out of steam. So you can't fill somebody else's cup if your cup is empty. The oxygen mask metaphor. You got to put the oxygen mask on yourself before you put it on someone else. I was watching last night the Tom Hanks movie Castaway. Have you ever seen that?
Yes.
He's and the scene where the plane is going down, one of the pilots or co-pilots comes running out and the oxygen mask comes down and Tom Hanks' character is kind of gasping for breath, but the guy puts it on himself first. And then he gets it to Tom Hanks' character. So it's the same thing, that if we don't take care of ourselves, if we don't say no, we get all gived out. I certainly did. And saying yes all the time doesn't necessarily make you a better person. It could make you a pushover. Yeah. We teach people how to treat us. So if people expect that you're always going to be the go-to person, why wouldn't they keep asking? And you get to decide whether you're a yes or you're a no to anything that's asked of you. Again, within limits. Like, if you're driving beyond the speed limit, that's a no. Yeah. So it's about discernment. Maybe that's a better word.
Yeah, and that goes into setting boundaries too, because that what you mentioned about saying yes all the time reminds me of a friend of a friend. Living in Chicago, there's a lot of consultants here, and when you're new out of college and starting new jobs, I know I did it in my first companies that I worked for. You say yes to everything because you want the opportunities, you want to look like you're a go-getter, and that's just kind of just how the Americas work, the culture of this country.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember this one friend where she said yes so often and worked for this consulting company where they already worked 12 hours a day, insane hours. She always said yes, and she did things very well. And she would say, "Oh, I'm trying to get that promotion," but would be working until 2 or 4 in the morning, but then have to be back at 9 a.m. the next day. And I remember my friend telling me this. He was telling me the conversation that they had where he said, "You're not showing them that you're a leader or a manager, them that you will say yes to everything, that people can push their work onto you and you'll do it no problem." And it was a really hard lesson for her to learn. And she finally ended up actually leaving that job altogether and going on to other opportunities, thank goodness. But it really is, setting those boundaries. And if you don't set those boundaries, some people will take advantage of you.
Yep, absolutely. So I'm proud of myself that I've said no more often.
Yeah.
I was just wrote an article a bit about that, about since the pandemic, I've reoriented my priorities. I turned down a writing job last week that I thought was going to be too time and labor intensive. And I thanked the person for the opportunity, but I said, I wouldn't be able to give you my best because my plate is already full. And that would have been unthinkable before. Like, oh my God, if I say no, then they'll never approach me again. And if I say no, then I won't make enough money. And what's all that worth if you're passed out on the floor from oxygen deprivation, right? So it's okay to say no. And maybe a cool exercise for people to do is make a list of all of your absolute yeses, like yes, I'm more than willing to do this. Make a list of your absolute no. I would never do this. Like, I would never rob a bank, kill somebody intentionally. What are your hard no's? And then where's there some wiggle room? Where can you negotiate? Like, If somebody asks you to do something that you don't have the time or the energy to do now, you could say, you know what, I can't do it today, but I'll be able to do it tomorrow. And then follow through, be in integrity. Because when you're not listening to your own needs, you're out of integrity with yourself. We teach people how to treat us. We teach them what we're willing to accept. So for me, that's what consent is about too. And then I have to check in with myself and say, all right, why are you doing this? Are you saying yes because you want them to like you, approve of you, give you more business, tell other people good things about you? You don't want to let people down. So those are some reasons. I know those are my reasons often. Maybe they're yours. Maybe, those of folks who are listening or watching can identify those as their reasons as well. Like, I'm expected to, how can I not? I've got, one of the things, and I don't even have a name for it, but one of the things that I've done is think, my life is so good, what do I have to complain about? But then I look back and say, all right, I was widowed at 40. I raised my son as a single parent. My parents are both gone. I'm the family matriarch. I had shingles, heart attack, kidney stones, what else? Pneumonia, and now COPD over the last 25 years. And I'm still standing. So what do I have to complain about? I have a roof over my head. I've got family and friends. I'm considered relatively healthy, functional. So how can I ever feel bad about anything? Guess what? I get to. I get to say, all right, I need to slow down. I need to not only ask for, but be willing to receive support. So that's consent too. I remember a few years ago, a friend had said to me, I don't need or want anything from you right now. Just receive, what I'm offering you. And I was like, ooh, if people don't need or want anything, of what value am I? Mm-hmm. So that's part of the consent too. I had to give myself consent, permission to receive. Yeah. That's a big one.
Something you mentioned there too reminds me of something my therapist said, who also has a master's in social work. So you reminded me a lot of her.
A master of saving the world.
Master of saving the world, yes. Where she mentioned the concept of two truths, where it's okay to feel two different ways about the same situation.
Yep.
And that's...
Yep, both and. Yep, absolutely. I was listening to a podcast interview with Brene Brown, who just came out with a new book. Mm-hmm. And it's called The Atlas of the Heart, I believe. And she was talking about that concept too. She's a researcher who did a TED Talk in 2010 about shame, about her research around shame. So she's become a big name since then. And this book and the NPR interview with her was about how many different feeling states, how many different emotions we have. And she came up with 87 of them. Now, I just got the book. I haven't read, haven't read too much of it yet. But I think about that. Can I give myself permission to feel 87 different feelings? That's a tough one, because if I tell myself and if I tell my clients that it's okay to feel whatever you want, but it's not okay to act on some of the feelings. Like, if I'm angry, I can say, I'm really angry that this happened, but it's not okay in my value system to call people names, to put them down, to threaten them in any way. It's not okay to lay hands on somebody when I'm angry with them. So that's about consent too. What do I give myself permission to feel? What do I give myself consent to do? For a lot of people, they have to give themselves consent to feel good, to feel successful. You've heard of the term imposter syndrome?
Yes. Oh, I have felt that many times.
Yep. I experience it on the regular. And it's the idea, for people who haven't heard of it, that no matter how successful you are, no matter what people think of you, if only they found out that you're really full of it, they wouldn't trust you to do what you're doing. You feel like an imposter. So give yourself permission to acknowledge even what we would call negative thoughts and say, all right now I'm feeling really crummy. I'm feeling depressed, lonely, scared, sad, worried, nervous, whatever it is that you're feeling, and honor those feelings, because they're messengers. They're here to teach us something about ourselves and about the world.
Right. And ultimately, it sounds like all of these things it's important to have these conversations with ourselves to understand where our value systems lie, where our
Mm-hmm.
boundaries lay, really just kind of that stepping stone to really understanding where our consent lies, to understand it in ourselves, and then also be more
Yeah.
receptive to other people's consent and their own boundaries as well. Right?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And even in intimate relationships, and maybe especially in intimate relationships, even if you're used to your partner saying yes, it's okay for them to say no sometimes. Like I'm all tapped out. I don't have the energy to go here with you. So I'm just going to stay home tonight and rest. You go have a good time. Or even around touch. That there's sometimes, like if I know some people who, when they feel sick, don't want anybody near them. Just leave me alone. Don't bother me. And then there's some people that want to be oohed and ahhed over and have their feet rubbed or their cold washcloth on their forehead. So it's okay to check in with yourself and say, what do I need right now?
Mm-hmm.
What would help me feel good right now? Now, the danger in that is addiction. That there are people's go-to feel-good things are things that are not necessarily healthy for them. Drugs, alcohol, too much sex, shopping, gambling, um, whatever it is that fills the hole in the soul. So consent also has to do with, what do I need? Not what do I want, but what do I really need? What will help me feel fulfilled in this moment? So that's and the other caveat is, and won't hurt somebody else in the process.
Right.
That my marching orders every day are, how can I get my needs met without taking from somebody else, without harming people, anybody that I come in contact with.
Yeah. And that's something to, because it goes back to something you said in the beginning about how just being human, we need consensual touch. That those are things that we need to thrive. And there's been times where I've been so stressed out or exhausted, and I just ask my boyfriend to hug me, and he asks me, what do you need right now? And I just say, I just need to recharge. I just need a hug. I just need to cuddle for a little bit. Nothing more. I don't want to talk. Just and so it's those asking what others need, but then letting people know exactly what you need.
Right.
Just it could be just a simple hug. But then I think also too, one thing we talked about prior a couple weeks ago was how, especially in romantic relationships, it can be so difficult to say no because you love the person and you want to, give them things and, do things for them, whether it's chores or going out of your way to do something or anything physical, but that it's okay to say no to your partner. But that can be tough.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if it feels like the relationship is transactional. Like, I'll only do this for you if you do this for me. And the ideal situation is, I want to do this for you and I want you to want to do this for me, whatever it is. But to accept that you're not always going to have the energy to, or they're not always going to have the energy to. So that's where negotiation skills come into play. And I absolutely agree about that. And relationships are challenging. Not only do they teach us about the other person, they teach us about ourselves. Like, who am I in this relationship? Am I bringing my best self to this relationship? And I remember many years ago, like in my 20s, I took a training called the Loving Relationships Training, the LRT. And two of the facilitators, a husband and wife, used to say that love brings up anything unlike itself for the purpose of healing and release. So it's good, and I say, love is a laxative because it stirs up a lot of shit. And that's absolutely true. Being in a relationship, whether it's a romantic partnership, parent-child relationship, friendship relationship, is going to stir up stuff. It's going to stir up a lot of our triggers. I was watching I watch PBS a lot and listen to NPR a lot, but there was a show with Dr. Daniel Amen, Amen, and he's a neuropsychiatrist, and he and his wife Tana, I think she's a neuropsychiatric nurse, were talking about the dragons that we all live with, like the developmental dragons. So they're those are the insecurities, and they're triggered by childhood trauma. And I think about that when people don't say no, it's because they were taught, if you say no, bad things will happen. If you say no, mommy or daddy won't love you, or somebody's going to be mean to you. So it takes practice to be able to say no to something. And even a cuddle party, I tell the participants that even though I'm telling you it's okay to say no, if you're cuddling with somebody who's looking uncomfortable, check in with them and say, are you sure you're okay with this? It's really okay to say no. And it's so hard, the fight, flight, or freeze response. Yeah. But lately, there's one that was added to it, the fawning response. So you're fawning over somebody so they'll like you. Mm-hmm. The approval seeking. I used to call it Little Shirley Temple tap dancing for approval. Wanting to be everybody's sweetheart. Mm-hmm. You don't want somebody not to love you. Like if you think the source of love is from somebody else, you're always going to do what you can to protect that. Mm-hmm. If you know that the real source of love is in here and you never run out of it, then you may not feel the need to say yes when you really want to say no.
Yeah. So what's some advice that you would give? Because I am a people pleaser myself. I have lots of friends who are. Mm-hmm. We talk about this all the time, where mm-hmm. you want to do favors for your friends. You want to, but you also know you mm-hmm. need to take care of yourself. So what's your advice to strike that balance?
Right. Well, again, be honest with yourself and ask yourself what you really have time to do. You can only literally be one place at a time. And if you have prior commitments, then it's probably not a good idea to break them in order to take care of something else, unless it's an emergency. You got to be able to drop and run if it's an emergency. But to be able to say, am I saying yes because I want them not to be mad at me, or I want them to like me, or am I saying yes because I genuinely am willing to do it and I have the time? You've heard the term bandwidth. Mm-hmm. I have the bandwidth to do it. And if they ask you something that you simply cannot do, then it's okay to negotiate and say, I know you asked me to do this and I really, really want to. And my schedule, I don't even use the word but anymore, because that invalidates, like you're trying to explain or justify your answer. And I really don't have the time to do it today. When do you need it to be done? Like a simple one for me is I get approached a lot to do book reviews. Like, can you read my book and write a review for it? And I'll tell them, well, I've got 2 or 3 ahead of you. If you can wait, then I can do it. And as I said, I turned down a job last week because I didn't have the time to do it. Mm-hmm. The money would have been nice, but it wasn't worth sacrificing my peace of mind for. So that's the other thing you can ask yourself. Am I sacrificing my peace of mind by saying yes? Mm-hmm. And, if somebody asked, you asked somebody to do something and they couldn't do it, how would you feel about them? Would you think they don't love me, they don't care, they don't, they're not here for me? Now, if it happens consistently and it's a pattern, then that person might be a little flaky and not mm-hmm. reliable. So you don't ask them for what you need.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think because a lot of times it's a lot of stories that we create of just mm-hmm. assuming this person's going to think X, Y, Z, this person's going to think that. So a lot of times, is it reality? Are they actually going to think that? And I loved your phrasing of, would you feel the same way about them? Because right. Truly, it's usually just stories that we create in our own heads that then mm-hmm. make us think that we have to do something or other, when really none of that's reality. Right. We could have avoided a whole lot of stress or exhaustion or whatever else, and really the other person wouldn't mm-hmm. have cared if you had said no. They probably would have respected you for it, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. And, I think back to our role models. Again, my parents modeled doing it all. My dad worked a full-time job, blue-collar, dirty hands kind of job. But when he was home, he was the daddy. And he volunteered in our community. He was a volunteer firefighter. He volunteered at our synagogue. He volunteered with a little girl in the neighborhood who had either MS or muscular dystrophy. And he did, back then, what was called patterning, which is kind of like physical therapy now. So he did that. My mom had a full-time job. She volunteered at the hospital. She volunteered at the synagogue. She was a room mother when my sister and I were in school. She was a Girl Scout cookie mom. She was a gate guard at the pool. And it never occurred to me back then that they were doing anything unusual. But now I think, how the heck did they do it all? Mm. How did they manage it all? And they were my models. They rarely said no to anybody, even into their 70s and 80s. when somebody needed something, that their friends or neighbors, they'd drop and run. So I learned from masters how to be a good little codependent.
Mm-hmm.
And now, since the heart attack was a big turning point for me in 2014, I was 55 years old on the way home from the gym, where I had worked out 5 or 6 days a week and working 12 to 14-hour days, sleeping 5 or 6 hours a night. Sleep was highly overrated, is what I would say. And I hit a wall, not literally, but since then I'm able to say no with greater grace.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody's abandoned me. Nobody's said, you don't love us. They've understood. They've encouraged me to say no.
Yeah.
So you don't have to have a heart attack for that, though.
Yeah.
I encourage people
So hopefully people can listen to this and learn from your experiences and doesn't take a heart attack to learn that more. But I love that silver lining though, and that's something that you've mentioned your heart attack a few times, of the silver linings of the lessons that you've learned and the life that you've been able to live beyond it.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And what I say is that the woman that I was died that day to give, I didn't literally die, but to give birth to the one that's talking to you now. And she had to die because she was killing me.
Mm-hmm.
So I've learned that I can't go back to that life anymore.
Yeah.
It's gone.
And consent is so huge with that. And I love that most of this conversation has been around just verbal, mental, emotional consent and things, not physical, not again relating to when most of us think of consent, we again think of the Me Too movement. But even slightly related to that, going back to the physical a little bit, what's some advice? Because this is something I actually talked to a friend a few weeks ago, and we had a conversation. She has a newborn, and she talked about being a mother. You have a baby on you all the time, constantly touching you, and sometimes she actually told me a story of one evening her husband went to cuddle her, and she said, "No, I don't want to do anything. I'm exhausted." And he's like, "I just wanted to cuddle." She assumed that he wanted more, but that's not actually what he wanted. And so there's a little bit of implied consent, especially with romantic partners. Right. Could you speak on that a little bit more?
Sure. Yeah. In that situation, first of all, I can understand how, being on call 24/7 for a baby. And it's still important that the partners have intimate time. And I'm not just talking about sex, but emotionally intimate time as well. So in that situation, your friend might have said, "Honey, I love you, and I've had the baby clinging to me all day. I would love to cuddle, and I don't have the energy for it to go any further than cuddling. Are you okay with that?" Now, depending on the kind of relationship that you have with the person, if the partner might feel offended, might feel like you don't love me, the baby's replacing me, because I've heard that that's pretty common, that feeling. And if somebody could be that, because consent and assertiveness go hand in hand too. If they can assertively say, "This is what I need," if you're okay with that, then sure, I'd be glad to cuddle. So that's a piece of information. But check in. That's a big one too. Is if you're not sure, we make assumptions so often about what other people are thinking. So the other thing around consent is the helper instinct. If it's an occupational hazard for me, maybe you too, as a coach, to offer advice when it's unsolicited. And if somebody comes to me, a friend comes to me and says, "Can I talk to you about XYZ?" I'll always preface it by saying, "Do you want me to just listen and hold space? Do you want advice? Do you just want me to nod and say, mm-hmm?" Do you want me to agree with you so I know what I'm walking into? And that's consent too. If we're both in agreement about what this is another one. If we're both in agreement about what we want the outcome to be. When we scheduled this, we made an agreement that we would both show up at this time to have a conversation about these subjects, knowing full well that either one of us could order off the menu and veer off into a detour, but we knew what the parameters were. And you knew that I probably wasn't going to talk about something so totally off the agenda that you're thinking, "Wait a minute, didn't we have a conversation about this before, what we were going to talk about?" So there's consent in this interaction as well. No. So it's everywhere in every one of our relationships is consent.
Yeah. And I love that this is being pointed out in this way, because I didn't think of it in that way. Even after our conversation a few weeks ago, hearing it in this specific way, just realizing that like every hour of every day you're consenting to something or asking for consent for something. And so I think recognizing that kind of opens a door of realization and a mindset around our interactions with each other and with
Mm-hmm.
ourselves.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Is there anything, because I know you've done so much work in this, preparing for your TED Talk and
Mm-hmm.
sending everything in. Is there any hitting home points or anything we didn't cover that you want to make sure is talked about or shared with the audience?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, about consent. Oh, also, saying yes to what you want in life. That's about consent too. Very often, I can't speak for men since I wasn't born a man in this lifetime. Um, Oftentimes, people will say, "Would you like this energy, time, gift, sex, love, trip, whatever it is, money?" And we're taught as women, "Oh, no, no, I can't. I can't accept that." Yeah, you can. Okay. If it's within your value system, if you're in integrity by accepting whatever's being offered to you, it's okay to say yes to what you want as well. You don't have to be self-sacrificing and say, "Oh, no, no, I can't have that. It's only for other people. I'm not worthy." Yeah, you are.
Mm,
So I think that's a big piece of it too. Give yourself permission. Give yourself consent to have what you want in your life. Create the kind of life that sings and soars and turns you into a human sparkler. You know.
I love that. What a great way to end
Thank you.
this episode on such a positive note.
Thank you. Thank you.
And if anyone loves everything that you were saying, I mean, depending on when we end up releasing this episode, hopefully there's some fun news to share about your TED Talk. Not hopefully, there will be good news to share about your
Yeah.
TED Talk. I'm going to
Hmm.
rephrase that. We're manifesting
Thank you.
here. So I will link everything in the show notes. But where else would you like me to link so people can get a hold of you,
Oh,
follow
sure.
you, get more of your amazing insight and
Thank
advice?
you. Thank you. My website is www.opti-mystical.com. And again, where that came from is a message that I got several years ago that said, "You're not just an optimist, you're an optimistic who sees the world through the eyes of possibility." And the cool thing about it is, I forget how many years ago, on my birthday, October 13th, whatever year it was that I created that, a friend created a meme for me with an elephant with a top hat sitting on a bird's nest, and I think with a propeller on it, and I think there was a bird somewhere in there, and it had the words on it. And Julian Lennon, John Lennon's son, got a hold of it and posted it on his page, and it was so exciting. So it's made a worldwide whirlwind tour. I'll send it to you so you can see
Yeah,
it.
please do.
That's the website, and I'm also very active on Facebook. So it's EDIE Weinstein, WEINSTEIN.
And I'll be able to link your Facebook as well. So that will all be in the
Okay.
show notes.
Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much again, Edie, for coming onto the show twice. Another amazing conversation.
Thank you. My pleasure. Big hugs.
Big hugs.
If you want them, by consent.